Do plants scream when you cut them? You're standing in your garden. The air is still. The leaves barely move. You reach out, hold a green stem between your fingers, and cut. To you, it's nothing. A neat snip. A few leaves for chai, a flower for the table. The plant doesn't bleed. It doesn't cry. The garden stays silent. At least that's what your ears tell you. But in the last few years, scientists have pointed special microphones at plants and discovered something unsettling. When certain plants are cut or slowly deprived of water, they start producing bursts of sound. Not in our range. Not like a human scream. Ultrasonic pops. Sharp clicks. Short invisible pulses traveling through the air at frequencies far above anything you will ever hear. So the question hiding in your garden is simple and hard to forget. Asterisk asterisk, when you cut a plant stem, is it silently screaming from stress or pain? Asterisk asterisk, let's start with what a plant actually is. It looks simple. Leaves, stem, roots. Green background to your life. But inside, it's busy. It senses light and shadow. It feels gravity. It responds when something touches its surface. It knows in its own way when an insect has started chewing through its leaf or when a neighboring plant is blocking its sun. And yet there's a gap. Plants don't have brains. No neurons. No spinal cord. Nothing that looks like the nervous system you rely on to feel pain. For a long time, that was the end of the argument. No brain, no pain. No nerves, no scream. Case closed. Then scientists began to look not at what plants don't have, but at what they do when they're under attack. When a caterpillar bites into a leaf, the plant doesn't just accept it. It can flood its tissues with bitter or toxic chemicals that make the insect's meal unpleasant. It can release airborne compounds that call in other insects, tiny bodyguards that attack the caterpillar on the plant's behalf. It's not screaming. It's signaling. It's defending. All of that is silent chemistry. So researchers asked a different question. What if plants are not silent at all, and we simply never listened in the right way? In one set of experiments, scientists placed tomato and tobacco plants inside controlled chambers in greenhouses. They positioned ultrasensitive microphones just a few centimeters away, not listening for human speech, but for frequencies far above the human hearing limit. Then they stressed the plants. Some were left without water, slowly dehydrating. Others had their stems cut, a deliberate wound. The expectation was simple. Plants would stay quiet, maybe with some internal changes, but no sound leaving their bodies. That's not what happened. As the plants dried out or were physically cut, the microphones started picking up distinct ultrasonic pops. Little bursts of sound between roughly 20 and 150 kilohertz, well beyond what you can hear, but, at close range, comparable in intensity to an ordinary human conversation. Healthy plants, well-watered and untouched, made very few sounds. Drought-stressed plants began clicking more and more as their internal water tension grew worse, sometimes dozens of pops in an hour. Cut stems produced their own pattern of clicks in the minutes and hours after injury. The scientists then trained computer models to listen to these recordings. From just the sound patterns, the models could tell whether a plant was dehydrated or freshly wounded. In other words, a machine could diagnose plant stress without seeing the plant at all, just by decoding what sounded, to us, like pure silence. So what was creating those pops? Inside a plant, water travels through tiny tubes in the stem and roots. When the plant is under severe stress, especially drought, air bubbles can form in that water column. Those bubbles can suddenly collapse in a process called cavitation, and each collapse can send a sharp vibration through the plant tissue and into the air as an ultrasonic sound. On one level, these are not screams. They are physical side effects of a stressed plumbing system breaking under pressure. But here's where the wonder really begins. These sounds don't disappear just because you can't hear them. Bats, insects, small mammals, many of them can detect ultrasonic frequencies. A moth looking for a plant to lay its eggs on might avoid one that is clicking with stress. A neighboring plant might pick up tiny vibrations and start adjusting its own behavior, preparing for drought before it fully hits. Suddenly, your quiet garden is not quiet at all. It is an invisible soundscape, a place where stressed plants are broadcasting their condition into an ultrasonic world you were never designed to notice. So when you bend down, hold a stem, and cut, is that plant screaming? To answer that, we have to separate two ideas that we constantly mix together, a signal and an experience. When a human screams, there is a sound outside, air forced through vocal cords, muscles tensed, lungs pushing. But there is also a feeling inside, pain, fear, panic, a conscious awareness that something terrible is happening. The sound alone is not the scream. The experience behind it is. With plants, we can measure the signals. We can record the clicks. We can prove that they increase when the plant is cut or dehydrated. We can even use those signals to tell which kind of stress the plant is under. What we cannot measure is whether there is any inner experience behind those signals. Most scientists argue that without anything like a central nervous system, plants cannot feel pain in the way animals do. Pain in biology is not just damage. It's damage interpreted by a brain that can suffer. Plants respond to damage. They adapt, they warn, they defend. But suffering is a different question. Other researchers point out that plants can remember stress changing how they grow in the future based on what happened before. They send electrical pulses from root to leaf. They coordinate responses across their tissues. They behave like distributed networks rather than simple, isolated parts. It is not a brain, but it is not nothing. So you end up in a strange place. If scream means a conscious cry of pain, plants probably do not scream. If scream means a clear, urgent signal that something is wrong, then a stressed garden is full of screams you cannot hear. Now imagine the scene again. You walk into your garden at dusk. From your perspective, it's peaceful. But if you could suddenly hear in the ultrasonic range, the quiet might vanish. You might hear a thirsty tomato plant clicking urgently, a cut stem bursting with sharp pops, a dehydrated shrub broadcasting a pattern of stress sounds into the night, heard by passing insects and maybe even by neighboring plants. You would discover that the garden you thought was silent has been talking the entire time. Not in words, not in human emotion, but in measurable signals that carry meaning for the creatures and plants that can detect them. And once you know that, your relationship with plants changes. You can't stop eating them. You can't live without affecting other living systems. But you can stop thinking of them as pure objects. You can see them as participants in the environment, broadcasting their state, reacting to harm, warning each other in ways we are only just beginning to understand. Next time you reach for a stem, the next time you pluck a leaf or trim a branch, remember that under your fingers, in frequencies your ears will never notice, that plant may be emitting a pattern of stress pops, the closest thing it has to saying, "I'm under pressure. I'm damaged." Not a human scream, not a horror movie cry, but a reminder that the line between alive and thing is far blurrier than we were taught. And once you hear that, even only in your imagination, you will never look at your garden, your balcony plants, or that single lonely tree by the road the same way again.